Theophilus Tiso, Theophilus Tiso, Theophilus Tiso. I'm ready, sir. One by one, let's start with you, Duluga Boni Philip. They are testing your sound.
Hello.
You just introduce yourself, your name, and what you do at UNATU.
Yeah.
Umar, before you go, it is off.
Yeah, thank you, listeners. My name is Dulgaboni Philip. I'm the Deputy General Secretary of the National Teachers Union. There's the Motor Headquarters, Teachers House. Thank you.
Is that okay? And you, Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi. Is it Muge or Mugenyi?
Mugenyi.
Mugenyi.
Yes.
Okay, Mugenyi. All right, basic education.
Thank you very much. My name is Cleophas Mugenyi, Commissioner of Basic Education.
As a Commissioner of Basic Education, what do you do?
Oh, I do quite a lot. One, as you are aware, since 1987, the government introduced universal primary education.
1997.
1997. And therefore, one of my duties is to coordinate the implementation of UP program by working with stakeholders at various levels. For example, working with Ministry of Local Government, Ministry of Finance, other departments like Director of Education Standards, National Curriculum Development Center, Uganda National Examinations Board, to ensure that this program is implemented. Two, to design policies that can improve access, equity, and the quality of primary education. Three, to mobilize and sensitize parents and their community about early childhood care and education policy, universal primary education policy, and also ensure that the management and the governance of schools is effective by ensuring that every school has a school management committee. And these are not just in place, but they're operational. We also work with the Ministry of Finance to ensure that capitation grant, which is meant to facilitate the implementation of UP, is sent to the schools. And working with the district education officers, municipal education officers, municipal inspectors of schools, district education officers, we regularly do support supervision and monitoring to ensure compliance with standards and set guidelines. Yeah.
All right. Do you believe we need to tweak the education curriculum a little bit, especially at primary level? Because when I was learning, the curriculum was largely to de-radicalize myself and other who would be child soldiers at the time. The government was scared. We were heavily militarized. So education, we are not going to talk about that. This is on the side.
The curriculum has undergone.
It was largely to help people like Romeo know that the pen is mightier than the gun. But then at some point, we have now employers who are talking about skills. You need skills and not just reorientation.
We have now incorporated that in our curriculum.
A very good afternoon and many thanks for staying with us right here on NTV Uganda. My name is Romeo Basiku and I come to you yet again with another pertinent conversation on education and its recovery. Newly released projections reveal that more and smarter investment in teachers and teaching is needed to enable Africa's children and youth to access quality education. According to new calculations, to reach educational goals by 2030, Sub-Saharan Africa will need to recruit a total of 15 million teachers. Despite gains in the past 5 years or so, progress in recruiting more teachers has been too slow, and many countries need to accelerate the number of teachers they are recruiting per year. Uganda has a total of 550,000 teachers serving over 15 million learners in pre-primary, secondary, and also pre-primary, primary, and also tertiary institutions or universities. Now, so you can know that there's a burgeoning demand for more teachers in that regard. To shed more light on this, I'm now joined by Duluga Boniphilip, the Deputy Secretary General, Uganda National Teachers Union, Jonathan Kamwana, the Commissioner Teacher Education Training and Development in the Ministry of Education and Sports, and finally Cleophas Mugenyi, the Commissioner of Basic Education at the same Ministry of Education and Sports. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us on NTV Uganda.
Thank you.
All right, I'll kick off with you, Mr. Duluga Philip Boni. You are the Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General of the Uganda National Teachers Union. Let's talk about the situation in Uganda as far as gaps in teachers are concerned.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and listeners. Yeah, the situation in Uganda as far as teachers gap is concerned emanated right from the time when the universal primary education system came in place. That was around 1997. Actually, the issue came that teachers were needed, and therefore they had to get teachers from all walks of life. And therefore that marked the beginning of the trouble in the education system, because the teachers who were not trained were also part of the system. And you know, the quality of education depends on the quality of the teachers. Where you have trained teachers, definitely they correlate very well with the quality of the teachers.
Under strict observance of the SOPs, Mr. Duluga Philip, I believe it is right to remove the mask so that the viewer can be able to understand and digest the information you are divulging.
I hope our distance is okay.
It is very, very okay, sir. Go ahead.
So
from the beginning.
From the explanation I was giving, the gaps in the teaching sector in education started right from the time when universal primary education was introduced in Uganda.
97.
That was 1997. And it brought a lot of challenges, which challenges outweigh the system, the education system, where we saw a number of untrained teachers being enrolled, and therefore you don't have enough infrastructure, classrooms were inadequate, sanitary facilities were not in place. So a lot was focused on trying to welcome the huge enrollment that came as a result of the UPE policy. So focus was more on access, and more emphasis were put on access, and therefore the issue of quality was compromised. Which brought a lot of challenges. And we kept on with this system up to the time we are right now in, because each year in and out, we don't have the required finances to finance the education sector. If you look at
so you're telling us with the inception of universal primary education in 1997, the government focused too much on the enrollment, the number of pupils who are actually getting into the school system, and not the quality of the teachers who are divulging this information to the learners.
That's the affirmative.
All right.
Because more emphasis was put on this number of learners. We want to have this, and every year, you see, we have enrolled this number of people or learners, but little is being done on how we can improve on the training and the training of the teachers, and also the recruitment of trained teachers. I remember time came when the teachers were recruited, licensed teachers were recruited, and of course in between there were other programs which were targeting on tailored on teachers training, but it was not in itself conclusive enough to improve on the quality. And that brought a lot of challenges. I was looking at the issue of the structures. We had limited infrastructures at school.
Indeed.
Classrooms were not there. And program came in, people were trying to handle some of the challenges, which you always were overwhelming.
I hear you when you talk about the issue of quality of our teachers, because in the year 2000, over 84% of our primary teachers had the minimum required qualifications to actually teach. But then when you move fast forward to 2019, that figure reduced to over 65%. Go ahead.
Yes. And of course, that brought a lot of challenges at the school level. And of course, you know, the infrastructure challenges was a major issue. Focus was put more on trying to see how we can accommodate. And therefore, that brought another problem.
The trend continued up to 2019? At least.
That brought another problem, the teacher's workload.
Indeed.
Of course, now a teacher in a class is supposed to handle more than 100 teachers and 100 learners. So the teacher-people ratio increased, and therefore workload also increased. And that also brought the issue of the quality, undermining the quality. And of course, the issue of school achievement has always been a challenge. Because each time you try to emphasize on an issue, you are trying to address a concern. Now, to the extent that even the school managers had nothing to do other than trying to ensure that they accommodate the huge enrollment, and at the same time also try to ensure that they struggle with the little resources they have. Looking at the instructional material, there was also the program of trying to ensure we have instructional materials at school level. But of course, if you look at the ratio, it was still high. And these are challenges that kept on dragging for a good number of years. And this contributed to the compromise in the quality of education system in the country.
Of course.
Look, coming to the issue of the poor remuneration of the teachers, obviously, because they wanted more teachers and they don't have the resources. Education budget kept on year in and out being cut, and there is no other moment where you find education budget being increased. Every year we read the national budget, you find education sector is always having the mega resource. And this is something that contributed greatly, and it is just because we don't have the priority for improving the education system, because our focus was mainly on let us have them, and therefore we must appease the funders. Obviously, because all that enrollment was attracting a lot of resources. But now trying to ensure that we improve on the education infrastructure system, trying to make sure teachers are in the quarters, teachers travel long distance to come and teach, to the extent that you find a teacher also travels over 5 kilometers riding on a bicycle.
Mr. Duloga, if we are to hit our educational goals by 2030, we actually need to recruit 50 million teachers all over the world, not only Uganda. But then during this COVID-19 pandemic, we noticed a situation whereby teacher attrition continued to take center stage. Teachers leaving the vacation and choosing to do other menial jobs like border riding, frying parties, and other menial, very embarrassing jobs that they didn't study for. So with all these factors put together, do you think we are at par to hit these goals by 2030, recruiting 50 million teachers to teach our learners, or what else do we need?
Yeah, that target we may not be able to reach
by 2030.
Yes, simply because look at what is taking place in Uganda, for instance. They will be able to give us the statistics of the teachers who are recruited. And okay, for now, we may be having some of these trained teachers, but the challenge right now maybe is they are not being employed, because even at school level, we have a challenge of the ceiling. In most cases, sometimes they are being handicapped. Even if you have the qualified teachers, they will say, such a school has this number of what? Staff, and therefore you cannot go beyond what? That ceiling. And therefore this is something that if it's not being addressed it will continue rotating and year in and out.
All right, that is
Because
Duluga. All right, go ahead.
Infrastructure challenge must be addressed. If it's not addressed, then obviously you cannot employ the trained teachers.
I hear you. Duluga Philip Buni is the Deputy Secretary General for the Uganda National Teachers Union. Let's also bring in Mr. Kamwana Jonathan. He is the Commissioner of Teacher Education, Training and Development at the Ministry of Education and Sports. Mr. Jonathan Kamwana, we also do know that there is only one teacher for every 58 learners in the primary institutions, that is all over the sub-Saharan Africa continent. And we also do know that there is one trained teacher for every 43 learners in secondary institutions in sub-Saharan Africa. What are the figures here in Uganda? What should we be doing to increase the number of teachers within this profession and do away with teacher attrition, those leaving the profession?
Yeah, thank you, moderator. And nice being here at NTV to talk about the teacher gap and the teacher presence in our country. In our country, when you look at the population of teachers, I'm talking about over 500,000 teachers in the country. That is beginning from the early childhood development centers, where we have over 10,000 teachers in the primary, the ECD subsector. Then we have the highest number at the primary level sector. Then we have the number in the secondary schools. I think around the primary schools we have about 230,000 teachers. Then we have over 120 in the secondary school subsector, and the rest are in the tertiary institutions. I'm talking about the technical schools, the vocational schools, the nursing schools, universities, and all the other institutions.
Is this number enough to handle 15 million learners when we reopen education institutions, keeping in mind that many of these teachers, 500,000, may not come back into the education system because of the factors that Mr. Buni has mentioned?
Yeah, well aware, moderator, that with this pandemic,
yes,
a number of issues have come up,
yes, Mr.
and are challenging us at the sector. So, for example, there is stress, and the teachers, because they have been not working for 2 years, as have taken up other vocations, others are doing other businesses. But as a department concerned with teacher education, training and development, not about training and leaving them, we talk about teacher development. We have already engaged the teachers, trying to train them on how to manage the stress and how to cope up with the new hybrid approaches when they get back to school, as the schools reopen. So we are already engaging the teachers. Recently we held a virtual training where we had over 800 trainers of trainers, TOTs, who have just trained to prepare the others. So we are anticipating these challenges that are going to come, those who may not come. Government, so they're in the process trying to look at what are the next steps to be taken. So we don't want to speak about what will come, but we are preparing and have strategies on how to have the gaps covered, because we are thinking about people have already now joined NTV, others have joined the radio stations, others have joined, so many other people have now got other areas where they are earning an income, and they may not come back, and it is okay. For us as teacher training, development and management, when we see teachers joining the army, when we see teachers joining police, when we see teachers, for us not a bad thing, because we are seeing that if they are competent in teaching, they also can be competent soldiers, they can be competent policemen, so they can go.
But that would affect the education recovery that we are clamoring for.
Moderator, that's what we are doing. As a department, we are training. And we are training, trying to give the teachers the necessary competencies and skills and values so that these teachers can be highly motivated. We want teachers who are highly dedicated, who are committed, who are accountable, and who are adaptable.
How many are these teachers we are talking about?
Yeah.
How many are they?
The one we're going to train?
Yes.
Yeah, right now in the process, I said when we talk about training and development, we are talking about teachers who are in the field. We are going to go and take them through continuous professional development. Because
so we are not increasing the number of teachers, we are retooling those in existence.
We're going to do the retooling, but also we're going to increase. Because right now, if you look at the primary teachers colleges, national teachers colleges, and the universities, the highest number of students at universities are teachers.
Indeed.
You go to Chambogo University, you'll find that in year one, over 2,500 students are teachers, teacher trainees. So we are training teachers.
Indeed.
So the country is preparing, because we know that there is a challenge. We are preparing for this challenge, and we, as a department, we are putting in place all the strategies to ensure that when we reopen, we recruit those who have in the whole come back, and also recruit. Because if you look at the financial year 2021, 2022, in the primary subsector, the commissioner will tell you how many teachers are going to be recruited countrywide. Secondary subsector, we have the numbers. Over 3,500 are going to be recruited. So the government is working very seriously to ensure that we recruit enough teachers, so that when the students come back, we are able to catch up, train them, and also motivate them, and they are able to deliver on their mandate. So that's what government is doing.
All right. We also do know that teachers are non-existent largely within the rural areas. They are grappling with a low teacher capacity within the school system, especially the female teachers. At only 30% in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, we have only 30% of female teachers teaching within the education system. Now, don't you think this is the reason as to why we are seeing a low enrollment of girls within the education system, especially within the rural areas? Because we do know female teachers largely attract girls into the education system, and they ensure that they retain them when they enter school.
As a strategy, as government, we have an affirmative action to recruit teachers, first of all, to admit them in teacher training institutions. So, for example, at the university level, they are given 1.5 points to join education. That's an affirmative action. Even during the time of recruitment, female teachers are given 1 point ahead of the male counterparts. So government is doing all the affirmative action to ensure that we recruit teachers. Now, when we come to rural areas, there are a number of factors. You know, first of all, lack of accommodation. Whereas men can ride longer distances on their bicycles to get to schools, it becomes really very difficult for the female teachers to ride longer distances to go and teach because of lack of accommodation. But government is doing everything, and I'm happy that Commissioner's Basic Education is here. A lot of money is being set aside to ensure that we construct teachers' houses, to ensure that these teachers don't move longer distances, that they can stay at their schools and be able to teach. So this is a problem which we have identified as government. It's good we are talking about it. We are trying to find all possible strategies that we address it, so that female teachers are attracted to work in rural areas, so that they can be role models to the girls and the girl child. And as you look at our statistics in education, Commissioner will give you the information. Find that right now at the primary school level, we have more girls in the primary school than boys. Previously, we had more boys than girls. But he will even tell you, even at PLE level now, completion rate so. The completion rate for girls is becoming higher, as opposed to the previous year that we had girls dropping out at all levels. This is being seen at all levels, which means as a ministry, we are doing very well as far as affirmative action is concerned for the girls. Not only for the girls, but even for learners with special needs. We are taking every possible precaution to ensure that we have competent teachers who can address all learners and give equitable access to all the learners. So that's what we're trying to do as a ministry.
That is Mr. Kamwana Jonathan. He is the Commissioner for Teacher Education, Training and Development at the Ministry of Education and Sports. Let's also bring in the Commissioner for Basic Education at the Ministry of Education and Sports. That is none other than Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi. Thank you for joining us, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, let's talk about why there is a persistent gap when it comes to the number of teachers within our school system. Let's talk about some of the push factors behind the persistent gaps we are seeing right now.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that the quality of teachers we have in our schools these days are better than those we had previously.
Now, the statistics I did share before show that in 2000, 85% of the teachers in primary had the minimum required qualifications. But by 2019, that reduced to 65. Are you still standing by that statement saying that we have better teachers who are qualified?
I do.
Why?
Because
even with that reduction?
Yes. Previously, the admission criteria was that any teacher who has got 4 passes, including English and mathematics, would be admitted to a primary teachers college.
I see.
Right now, we require a credit in mathematics, in English, and 2 science subjects.
Indeed.
So that has ensured that the quality of the candidates who have completed senior 4 who are being admitted to the primary teacher training colleges are better. So I wanted to make that one clear.
All right, on the issue of quality.
On the issue of quality. Secondly, in 2019, the government came up with the National Teachers Policy, which is now professionalizing the teaching profession that can be at the same level with other professions.
I see.
And one of the things being emphasized is continuous professional development. Every teacher will get a license for 2 years, which will be renewable based on his or her performance.
That is Kamana's docket.
Exactly. So, as government, we are doing everything possible to make sure that the teaching profession is becoming more attractive, more interesting, so that we can be able to attract the best brains in this country.
To attract the best teachers or brains in this country, but
yes,
what are we doing to retain those whom we already have so that
Absolutely.
we reduce on the teacher attrition rates that we are seeing right now?
Yes, the attrition rates are not new. They have been there. They have only been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Number one is that we seem not to have robust teacher management systems, right from the ministry up to the school level. Of course, primary teachers are recruited by District Service Commission, while secondary school teachers are recruited by Education Service Commission. But the way they are managed at school, it really matters. Because you find that in some of these districts, teachers can take up to 6 months before they access payroll. And of course, that one pushes them away to leave the profession and look for any other possible means of survival. Secondly, the social amenities. As my colleague Jonathan said, some of these teachers are coming from distant places, so they need accommodation. And if they can't get it, then they have to commute from their homes to the schools. If they get some accommodation within the trading centers or towns near the workplace, the rent sometimes is quite high based on the salary that they are getting. So there are issues of opportunity cost. Do I rent a house or commute from home? The other issue about teachers is that manpower planning. I think as a country, we have not been planning properly until the advent of the National Teachers Policy. Right now, we know the number of teachers we need in this country, and we have now the teachers are registered. Through the MS, Education Management Information System, we can be able to tell the gaps, existing gaps per each local government. That's why in the current budget, Ministry of Finance Planning and Development has released 24.1 billion to recruit teachers all over the country. And this has to be done by December of this year. It has also released 22.9 billion to recruit secondary teachers. It has also released 18.8 billion to recruit teachers specifically for the seed secondary schools that were recently taken over by government. In addition, it has also released 3.4 billion to recruit teachers in the districts that are hosting refugees. So you can see from these figures, from the money that has been allocated to the education sector, that the issue of human resource has been prioritized in the current budget. It is also important to note that 4.3 billion Uganda shillings has been allocated for recruitment of inspector for purposes of support supervision and monitoring of standards in this country. So whereas it is true that we are losing teachers, it is also important to note that there are people out there who are looking for opportunities to become teachers, to join the teaching profession. If you went to the Education Service Commission, they will tell you that when they advertise for 200 teachers, they get over 1,000 applicants. So as we stand, we still have teachers within the country.
But there is still a persistent gap. Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi, why am I saying this? Because most of these teachers that you're going to be recruiting, the money that you're putting aside to recruit these teachers are going to the government-sided or government-aided schools. But then we have the private institutions. 61% of the primary institutions in this country are run by private institutions. 58% of the secondary institutions are run by private institutions. So you're recruiting as government, but then the private institutions or education institutions are actually closing shop. They're shutting down. They're selling off their premises because of the loans that were suffocating them, meaning these teachers will not be coming back to the fold, and they might also need to recruit these teachers. So don't you think we shall deal still with a major gap when it comes to teaching
yes, we
in the
shall
private
have,
institutions?
I don't think we shall have a gap, but even when we have a gap, there's what we call in-service teacher training programs.
I see.
So you can recruit untrained teachers who enroll for in-service teacher training, and after 3 or 4 years, they qualify as trained teachers. It is good practice to train somebody while doing their practice.
So the private institutions can recruit and then send these untrained teachers to you for major training?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So we have this arrangement. You can expound on that.
He will.
Yes, that primary schools and other levels of education can recruit untrained teachers who can later on join the in-service teacher training programs, and they will be able to qualify and become competent teachers. Of course, now we have the school management committees, we have the boards of governors.
Indeed.
The way they handle teachers also is contributing to the attrition of teachers, because of financial hardships. Sometimes you find that the board of governors are approved to pay, say, 200,000 as an allowance to a teacher, but because of financial complications at the end of the financial year, the teacher is demanding arrears, and the school is unable to pay. So the teacher is left with no choice but to leave and look for a school that can be able to offer better opportunities.
Indeed.
Yes.
Can we also talk about the psychological welfare of the teachers, aside from, acquainting them with the requisite skills that they need ahead of this reopening? Can we also talk about the fact that you need to be tackling the psychological distress these teachers have had to endure during this pandemic? Correct.
There has been training of education officers in the preparation of the opening schools to equip them with relevant skills to be able to provide psychosocial support, guidance and counseling, so that when schools reopen, the teachers and the learners and other staff are supported to fit into the new normal. Because as you know, parents, teachers, learners have lost their loved ones. And of course, when they report back at school, they are psychologically unstable. So Ministry of Education and Sports will continue to provide ongoing psychosocial support to the schools the moment they open.
Are you confident we might hit our educational goals of recruiting 15 million teachers by 2030 in sub-Saharan Africa?
We shall do our best, but in the case we are not there, we should be able to look at the possible options.
Which is?
As I've said, then we should be able to go for in-service training.
I see.
For the teachers that are willing to, for the candidates that are willing to join the in-service programs of government, so that at the end of it all, we can have, for example, the other alternative would be to introduce double shift system.
I see.
Yes, where you can have like P1, if you have more learners, you have some studying from morning up to midday and another shift coming in. So there are various options that we can use to make sure that the learners really access education.
All right, on the issue of ICT, I'll just fire it to Mr. Jonathan Kamwana when the time comes. I won't leave it to you. So, Mr. Jonathan Kamwana, we shall talk about the issue of acquainting our teachers with the latest technological advancements in ICT so that they can also, be brought into the fold of the new normal, because we are now learning online and many of the teachers didn't even know how to operate a computer. That is a recipe for disaster. Let's bring in the Deputy Secretary General of the Uganda National Teachers Union, that is Mr. Duluga Boni Philip. Mr. Philip, let's talk about what recommendations you have as the Uganda National Teachers Union to the central government or the Ministry of Education as some of the remedies that we could actually employ to address the teacher gap that we are dealing with at this opportune moment.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and listeners.
Indeed.
There is a lot that we needed to have sorted out earlier. As we have said earlier on, the high rate of teacher attrition has a basic reason. And one of these may be maybe because of the poor remuneration, poor payment, and at the same time also the working condition of the teachers. I think one of the most important things that the education department must do is to ensure that they pay teachers well, and at the same time also improve on the working conditions of the teachers, and so that we have adequate accommodation at school level, and also the teachers' motivation and other aspects are also taken care of. Because you remember there are a number of cases where you find people always blame the teachers for teacher absenteeism at school level, but there's always a reason why sometimes they are not in school. They are undergoing a number of issues, and now with the COVID-19 pandemic issues, there's a lot that is really affecting them. So the priority must be given to ensure that, and the COVID-19 has also brought the reality that really what we are paying teachers is not enough, and therefore it is important that we increase on their payment and also improve on the working condition. The second thing is on the education financing. The universal grants that we send to schools, in most cases, is not adequate enough, to the extent that you find most of the school heads are struggling to make ends meet. So it's important that the ministry must ensure that they have the increase on the funding, especially on the Universal Primary Education Funds and the Universal Secondary Education Fund, such that whatever is required to facilitate the teaching learning process is put into place. He has talked about the issue of continuous professional development, and I think this is something that's also important that we need to emphasize, because with the technology that has come in with the COVID situation, the teacher can never be replaced with the distance learning, neither with the online teaching process. Teaching to some extent requires that interaction, and therefore it's important that we need to ensure that we retrain and retool our teachers to ensure that they have the skills that are necessary to be able to meet the contemporary challenges that we are going through right now. There's also need for them to ensure that they will recruit teachers. As able said, the teachers are there. But now the challenge is we are not giving them the employment.
Indeed.
That's the challenge. And also another issue related to that is also sometimes the way we deploy our teachers.
Yes.
You find you may have enough, but to some extent the deployment also have impact in a way that sometimes more teachers are deployed in a certain area and others are being, you emphasize on the issue of the female teachers. Gender equity, indeed,
yes, because they attract more females and they ensure that they stay in school.
We don't have enough female teachers, and simply some of the issues is find that in most cases these female teachers are concentrated in the town areas. You find these rural areas, sometimes they may be lacking the teachers, and therefore it impacts negatively on the girls' child education. And these are things that sometimes it affects us greatly. It's important that they must engage and involve the union, and it's important that they must realize that they cannot work without the union. We play a very important role, and therefore engagement of the union in affairs of education will help to ensure that we put things to order. And of course the issue of operationalizing the teacher policy, he has emphasized on that. Actually, the teacher policy is a very important document, but first of all, we wanted to fast track the issue of establishment of the National Teacher Council, and of course that one has to be done immediately, and also the establishment of the National Institute of Teacher Education United, where we need to have the legality in all those areas, so that once it begins to work, obviously most of the issues that we are trying to address will be handled, because the teacher issues will be handled, and it will help us to ensure that everything is put in the light.
You also do have the that is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, that is calling for more increased funding that is going to the education sector. They are saying the domestic budgets here in Uganda should actually ensure that 20% of our GDP goes to the education sector.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a good measure?
Yeah, of course, I've also earlier on talked about the budget line for education sector.
Indeed.
In many cases, especially if you try to analyze yearly how much do we always allocate for education sector, you find it is really a meager source. And always you wonder whether sometimes we have that deliberate attempt to address.
Oh, is it deliberate? Kamana will tell us. That is Duluga Buni Philip, the Deputy Secretary General for UNATU. He says it could be deliberate that politicians and the ministry, politicians and legislators are just appropriating fewer shillings to the education sector. Could this be true? And how much money, by the way, a percentage of our GDP are we actually allocating to the education sector? Because the international benchmark requires us to actually have budgets allocating 20 to 30% of the GDP to the education sector. How much is it in Uganda?
I cannot be exact here, and I don't want to tell the nation something I've not come up with on my fingertips of how much we are providing for education in this country, because each state has what we call the priorities, but I know in our country education is one of the key priorities that we are funding. Next time I come, I'll give the country the actual figures. If my colleague, Dr. Mugenyi, has the figures, I think he will be able to give them. But I know that we have a substantial amount of money that is being sent.
So let's use the keyword of this little money going to the education sector. Why? If we are saying education is the cornerstone of every jurisdiction or country, why are we allocating little money, resources to the education sector? It's like we just want to pray over this problem and it fizzles out without tangibly putting in place the measures that will help us alleviate the challenge.
Moderator, that's what I was saying, that I don't want to come up with figures over the media and tell them a figure that I'm guessing, but I said my colleague, Doctor, if he has the figure, will be able to tell us, but I've just been telling you how much money we have put in the recruitment of teachers, in trying to establish the infrastructure, the classrooms. You can see how many buildings were put up at the universities. There is a lot of substantial amount of our budget which is going to the education sector, leave alone the salaries and what have you, but I don't have the actual figures. But what I know, being working in education, I know that the government is committed and is trying to do it all it can do to ensure that adequate monies are sent to the sector to ensure that we cater for our priorities in education. But I'll come up with a percentage at a later day, at a later time. But I think it is substantial which we are putting in education. We need some more, definitely, but we are trying our level best to ensure that we fund education adequately.
Besides increased budgetary funding to the education sector, what else needs to be done, courtesy of government, to actually address the persistent teacher gap that we are grappling with during this heinous pandemic?
We're trying to do a lot, like the Deputy Secretary was saying that right now, as a ministry, we are trying to establish the National Teacher Council, and we did a baseline study for the whole country. And we have come up with the 9 principles of the Teacher Act, the Teacher Bill, which we have already submitted to Cabinet. And as soon we shall come up with the Teacher Act, which will establish the National Teacher Council. And when we have the National Teacher Council, many of the issues that we are discussing here, the Council will be able to address, especially in terms of teacher professionalism, teacher performance, teacher adaptability, teacher motivation. All these issues are going to be addressed. So we're not only looking at the Teacher Council only, but we have also said, like the Deputy Secretary said, we are establishing the Uganda National Institute for Teacher Education to ensure that we don't only deliver in training teachers, but we train teachers who are competent, teachers who are skilled, especially in ICT, because when the COVID came in, you know that we had to use ICT in teaching, Google Classroom, Moodle Classroom, Zoom, but you know, every challenge comes with an opportunity. Many of our teachers are not touching the computer, they're not using their smartphones, they're not using laptops, they're not using tablets. But right now, you find that many of our meetings are on Zoom. We have recently, I've told you that we have just recently handled a training of 800 teachers online. We had this training for 3 days.
That is amazing, because it is much needed.
800 teachers, and we were able to train them for 3 days. And they were able to interact, papers were being presented, the questions were being asked, and we were being able to be answered. So you find that we are doing a lot. And all these issues were raised in the teacher report in 2013, 2014 of the ICT. All the issues we're discussing here are very clearly identified in the report, the teacher report 2013, and ICT as a pedagogical tool was articulated among the cross-cutting issues that we need to talk about in teacher education. And you find that now, with the COVID as an opportunity, you find that we are able now to use the Google Classroom, we are going to use Zoom, and many of the international schools are using these facilities. And this was because we had not planned for it, but when COVID came, we were able to take on. And as a Ministry of Education and Sports, we are coming up with a digital policy, the e-learning policy, so that all what we're going to do as far as the e-learning is concerned, we have a framework, we have a policy which will really guide on how we use the ICT equipment, the ICT tools in our schools, and how do we use ICT, how do we use ICT as a pedagogical tool to ensure that we can really teach our children. However, we have challenges which we have, we are experiencing. So for example, we have low levels of technology in the country. As you know, the teachers are not yet equipped. We are going to train them on that. Even the equipment themselves that we use, say for example, the computer, the laptops, the smartphones, the tabs are really not enough, and the price is still very high. Then internet connectivity, you are aware,
40%.
It's also a very, very big challenge that we cannot reach every child. It is the cost of internet is also high. You are very aware that, as a challenge. So we hope all these will be addressed by government, and not only Ministry of Education is going to address that, but the various ministries have to come together, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of ICT, and all these other ministries need to come in to ensure that we really have the connectivity to all parts of the country, and when the cost of data can also be lowered, then every child, it's an opportunity.
I see.
So we are looking at all these opportunities which we can use going forward, because going forward we think this will help us as a country.
That is Jonathan Kamwana. He is the Commissioner at Teacher Education, Training and Development at the Ministry of Education and Sports. We also have another Commissioner in charge of Basic Education, and that is Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi. Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi, he didn't have the aggregation, so I'll acquaint you. We do know that internationally, the international benchmark for education when it comes to budgetary allocations is 20 to 30% of the GDP. In Uganda here, as of 2018, the World Bank report actually states that this country was spending some 2% of its GDP on education. Is there really political will to actually fund the education system better from the politicians?
I think that question should be best answered by the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. But all I can say, as the English say,
because what you've been telling us from the beginning of the conversation is that there is will from government to fund the education sector.
Yes.
But we are only seeing 2% of expenditure being sent to the education sector.
You must also, my brother, you must also know that you cut your cloth according to its size.
I see.
Government cannot allocate resources which it doesn't have. So government allocates the resources based on what it has. We know that there are challenges within the education sector, but also similar challenges exist in the other sectors of roads, health, you know, transport. So
this is where we'll talk about prioritization of the education sector.
And as you know, government is one of the key priorities of this government. So the resources, we are allocated resources, they may not be enough, but within the available resources, the government allocates what it feels is available to the education sector.
Oh, so recommendations coming in from your decade, basic education, on how we can address the persistent teacher gap. We also do have callers that are going to be calling in to fire some few questions to you, the three guests. But go ahead.
Yes. Now, addressing the persistent gap, I think one...
Could I interest you with some statistics? We have one trained teacher for every 53 pupils in primary and one trained teacher for every 43 learners in secondary. You can start from there.
No, you see, statistics may not be necessarily true because they are not, sometimes the research is not representative.
All right.
But what I want to say is that, one, we need to interest the young learners to join the teaching profession.
I see. So
that we can have a surplus of teachers and we stop this culture of crying over inadequate teachers. We need to do that.
So what is the catch?
In order to do that, we have now put in place the national teacher policy, and as I said, we are professionalizing the teaching profession so that it can be seen at the same level of lawyers. Number two, I think government is doing whatever is possible to also increase the salaries of the teachers.
Nice.
You know, we have come a long way.
Indeed.
From 130,000 Uganda shillings to now close to 0.5 Uganda shillings for a primary school teacher.
All right.
Three, we are also trying to improve the working environment. As my colleagues have pointed out, we are putting in place teachers' houses, we are constructing classrooms, we are improving the wash facilities. So over time, the working environment in most of these institutions will be conducive for the teachers.
I see.
Yes.
Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi, the Commissioner of Basic Education at the Ministry of Education and Sports. We also do have callers that would largely want to front their questions to my three guests in studio with me. Well, okay, do we have a caller? All right, we are talking about the persistent gaps that are jeopardizing the recovery process in the education system, because the fact is that we do have 550,000 teachers in this country that are going to be serving 15 million learners. Is that a number that is actually very sufficient to handle that influx of learners that will be pouring into the education system when we reopen? 500,000 is not even part of the conversation. We are saying most of those teachers might not go back to the schools.
Hello.
Caller, a very good afternoon. We are closely approaching 5. So quickly, what is your contestation or question, if you will? Stay away from your TV set, your name and question. Persistent teacher gaps that are jeopardizing the education recovery. Good afternoon.
Hello?
Yes, you're live on NTV.
This is Peter Bagonza calling from Chegekwa.
Yes, Colin.
I would like to ask the commissioner, why can't the government help in paying salary for the private teachers? Because we have realized that private schools always perform well, yet the government schools are performing poorly, yet they are paid by the government. So I would request that the government will come in and help in the paying teachers' salary in the private schools in order to motivate them to perform their duty. Secondly, in the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has mentioned about giving relief to the private teachers who have stayed not working for almost 2 years. So as the commissioner and the Minister of Education, what strategy have they put across to assist these private teachers to come up? I remain as the Bagoza Godfrey calling from Chegegwa District, Akle Sub-County.
And send our regards to the people of Chegegwa. Thank you for those wonderful questions. Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi, why don't you pay private teachers? That's a question that I'll fire to you. There's another caller. All right. Good afternoon. Stay away from your TV set as you try to call. It will give a very negative feedback and we won't be able to hear you. The persistent teacher gaps in our country that are jeopardizing the recovery process. Let's also bring in Dr. Cleophas Mugenyi as we wait for this caller. All right, we also do have someone online. Cleophas Mugenyi, go ahead.
Thank you very much, the caller from Chegegwa.
Yeah.
Why does the government pay teachers in private institutions?
Because the ones in government have largely gotten paid even though they were not working.
Yes.
So it was a valid question.
As I said, if resources were allowing, government would be able to do this. But the resources that the government has cannot afford
I see.
the government to pay teachers in private institutions. Secondly, what the government has done is to ensure that teachers in private schools benefit from other services. When my colleague here organizes continuous professional development training for teachers, they invite every teacher to participate. If there's a facilitation, everybody is paid. When we provide instructional materials like the home study materials, all schools in the country who are given these self-study materials, irrespective of whether public or private. So government, as of now, is not in a position to pay teachers in private schools. Secondly, government promised relief to teachers in private institutions. I think it's about 20 billion.
22 billion is coming in next week.
Yes, so it is coming in next week. They just need to be a little bit patient.
So if I were to die January, February, March, April, May, June, July, I would be 6 feet under by now.
No, the problem was that the teachers in private schools were not organized. They did not have structures in place through which they would be able to benefit this money.
Indeed.
So
the money is not coming in late?
No, the money has been in place. What was not in place are the structures through which this money could reach every teacher in the country.
All right, let me get some last parting shots from my guests in the last 3 minutes. Yes, Mr. Kamwana, Jonathan, parting shots from you moving forward, the future of education and the recovery of the system.
Yeah, as a minister, we are doing everything possible to ensure that we prepare the teachers adequately for the example to reopening of schools. And as I told you, we are going to continue training the teachers. We are going to continue with the professional development, psychosocial support, and ensure that we do the support supervision, we do the monitoring, and I want to assure the country that once we reopen, we shall do everything possible as a ministry to ensure that we recover.
Make a clarion call to those new teachers that we want to join.
Teachers who want to join, please come and join us. Especially, we are now going to start on taking on the degrees undergraduate programs at UNITE. Please come. And for those who are already in the service, I want to tell you that we're going to see that within the next 10 years, all teachers who are below the level of a degree level will be trained, and the government is going to do its part to ensure that these teachers are trained. And by 2030, we expect that all the teachers in this country who will be trained, who will be teaching in our schools, will be at the level, at a degree level.
All right, let's crown this conversation by giving some few seconds to Mr. Duluga Boni Philip to give us some parting shots from UNATU.
Yeah, thank you, listeners and the moderator.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's important that as we prepare to reopen schools, we need to ensure that we have all that is needed, so that once our learners and teachers come back, there will be no cause for alarm, because the way we are trying to say is there is low level of preparation, which I think requires infrastructure challenges, and I think that is the challenge we are going through. And the Commission has emphasized on the issue of the psychosocial support training, which I think is key, because a lot of impact during the COVID-19 has impacted on the learners and the teachers. So there is a need to prepare and ensure that they are within the time when they will be able to undertake some of those stressing assignments, because there's a lot of stress, fears, and so on. And then finally, as we conclude, we are celebrating the World Teachers Day, and the theme for this celebration is Teachers at the Heart of Education Recovery. We want to, during this day, we give opportunity to focus on the teachers, that the support for teachers that needed to be fully supported to recover from these education challenges.
And with that submission, we've come to the end of this conversation. My name is Romeo Busika. Of course, I've been honored to be having Dr. Cleophas Mujenyi, the Commissioner of Basic Education at the Ministry of Education and Sports. He was not alone. We also did have Mr. Kamwana Jonathan. He is the Commissioner, Teacher Education Training and Development, also at the Ministry of Education and Sports, and also you,